Chapter 5 Immutable It was a winter's night, or maybe a spring evening. There were several nameless ponies gathered at the top of the hill under the purple starlight. Word had spread through the town about a natural light show, an amazing meteor shower of sorts. But Scootaloo could care less. All that mattered was one pony and one pony alone. "Wow, Twilight!" Rainbow Dash smirked between bites of an apple picked up from the picnic spread. "You're lucky to have such a rad assistant. I wish I had somebody to do whatever I told them." It was right there and then that the orange foal strolled up, and at the sound of the blue Pegasus's exclamation, the little filly ecstatically jumped in place. "Oh, oh, oh, me!" She smiled warmly. "I'll do whatever you want, Rainbow Dash." "Oh yeah, Pipsqueak?" The prismatically maned pony smirked the kid's way. "How about taking out the trash?" She tossed an apple core onto the grass. Scootaloo scooped it up gently as if it were made of gold. "Yes, ma'am." She flurried over to a garbage can at the very edge of the park and hurriedly rejoined the party. Minutes bled into an hour as Scootaloo hummed pleasantly in the shadow of Rainbow Dash. A hushed murmur hung over the crowd of Ponyvillian stargazers as the meteor shower began, lighting up the purple night with gentle pinstreaks of white and gold. Conversations drifted back and forth, wavering from Twilight Sparkle's expert recital of trivial astronomical facts to Lady Rarity's sudden inspirations for star-studded pageant wear. The only thing Scootaloo listened to in earnest was a certain Pegasus's fanatical ponderings on the latest Wonderbolt's air show. When the orange foal attempted joining the conversation, she was inevitably drowned out, but she didn't mind, so long as she was seated within the blue aura of the pony whose wings dwarfed her own. With a deep inhale, she was only vaguely aware of the petite purple shape crawling over to a nearby picnic basket, curling his exhausted scaled self into a hollow of an empty punch bowl, and sleeping like an infant. "Reverse time," a 10-meter tall Spike explained. "It's the means by which I can send things to the past. It's how I was able to transport you back to Miss Cheerily's schoolhouse. And it is also the sole reason for all my years of bold experimentation, deep introspection, and loneliness, until now." His snout melted forth a smile. "Welcome, Scootaloo, to my laboratory." The last pony's ears heard the elder dragon's words, but her eyes were still exploring the mesmerizing sights around her. She rested, mending, on a granite laboratory beside the grown dragon in the belly of a cavernous hovel. Under the gnarled roots of the late Twilight Sparkle's treehouse library, the basement had been expanded enormously into a subterranean dragon's roost. Above a sparkling array of multicolored gemstones was an elaborate assortment of alchemy tables, shelves upon shelves of magical ingredients in glass jars, sparkling crystal balls, electrified Tesla coils, elaborate brass-constructed rotating models of the equestrian solar system, and then a rhythmic howbeit noisy assortment of dozens upon dozens of clocks of all shapes and sizes, of various copper instruments clicking and clanking and spinning with infinitely complex precision across the sparkling lengths of the cave. A deep purple haze twinkled throughout the earthen interior beneath the heart of Ponyville, breathing a resurrected spirit of equestrian sorcery into the air, making the wide-eyed Pegasus's heart leap for the millionth time that eventful afternoon. "When the cataclysm befell Equestria, I was but a dragon whelp, hardly possessing any more years in the foal that you once were, old friend." The purple-scaled elder was applying the last of several bandages across Scootaloo's left side, patching the parts of her brown coat that were still sore, even after Spike's miraculous healing inside Sugar Cube Corner. "Just like you, I had to deal with a world deprived of everything and every pony I had ever loved. Ponyville was a wasteland. Canterlot was a ghost town. Princess Celestia and Princess Luna fell into the same oblivion, as did their sun and moon. I was alone. I needed help. I needed guidance. I needed wisdom. But when I cried out her name, drowning in the nubile fits of infinite sorrow, I heard no response. My beloved mentor Twilight Sparkle was dead." At the end of his last exhalation, a green fume wafted through the subterranean hideout. Spike's emerald eye slits faded slightly as a twirling violet pendant reflected the mana light that shimmered off the hundreds upon hundreds of savage clock face. The cacophony of the multiple antique timekeepers floated him back to the present, and he once again smiled softly at the last pony, all the while gently helping her down from the granite lab table. My sole inspiration for living may have disappeared, but I would rather have been cursed than let Twilight's spirit die. My desperate mind suddenly remembered an experiment she and I had embarked upon barely 6 months before the cataclysm. The bright young unicorn had speculated that it was possible to send items through time via my green flame, as we had always been able to send things through space, such as Twilight's letters to Princess Celestia. Our exercises in chronological manipulation proved unfruitful, but like a good scientist, I realized that they could be repeated. My young self embarked upon a noble crusade, to see if it was possible to send a message, and perhaps even myself, back through time before the cataclysm happened. I locked myself deep within the caverns of the Canterlottian Mountains, and for years I racked my draconian brain over every mathematical and magical formula that could make this dream come true. Scootaloo limped aside, giving the large adult dragon room to saunter past the pony and towards the granite struts of wall. With swift precision, Spike breathed hot green flame into his finger's claw, rendering it to a literal firebrand which he proceeded to etch from left to right across the stone. Upon finishing a crude diagram, the elder dragon gestured towards the smoldering illustration. There was a straight horizontal line entitled Past Ponydom, and carved to the right of it was a crude X labeled Cataclysm. To the right of this was a zigzagged line which Spike simply marked Wastelands, Fourth Age. Decades passed since the cataclysm, and I finally made my breakthrough. I discovered reverse time, a way in which the currents of chronology sink backwards via the same fluidity of forward motion, like waves upon a beach. Excited and enthused beyond measure, I proceeded with great courage to perform the first trip back through time ever committed in this world. Spike proceeded to draw a curved line leftwards from a point in the zigzagged future all the way back to the X. There his burning claw stopped, and he uttered in a cold breath, "Imagine my horrendous disappointment when I discovered that I could only go as far back as the first day after the cataclysm. The day that Princess Luna and Princess Celestia died had become an impermeable barrier. The sundering of magic that marked the moment of their perishing acted as a solid wall against which my draconian self could not pierce through, no matter how much green flame I conjured. Still, I refused to believe that all of my experimentation was for nothing." Spike's finger curved backwards towards the first time jump at the right of the zigzagging diagram, so that his etchings formed double ellipses between the cataclysm and the jump. "So, after several years of planning and calculation, all the while spent reliving the same lifetime in the hollow of the Canterlottian Mountains, I again made a voyage back along the pathways of reverse time, and I again struck the barrier." Scootaloo's eyes watched dizzily as Spike's finger formed the loop-de-loop course, an infinity symbol, always starting in the future and yet always stopping just right of the hash mark labeled Cataclysm in the center of his grimly etched diagram. "I repeated this desperate attempt over and over again," Spike murmured, "every time growing smarter, yet every time growing more and more despondent in my endeavors. Soon after more than 15 trips back to the past, I had finally to accept the grim truth. There was no going back to warn my loved ones of the horror that ended them all." He boldly circled the X at the point of the diagrammed cataclysm, and lowered his sizzling claw with bitter finality. Equestria was doomed to stay dead forever. 15 trips? Scootaloo finally spoke up, stammering. "Spike, just how old are you?" He took a weathered breath. "Taking into account my rate of growth, cross-analyzed by a relativistic calendar that I manufactured for myself long ago, I would say that I'm something close to 372. "Spike!" Her face grimaced. "That's a long time." "To ponder the fate of the only world I've ever loved," he gazed deeply at her, "it's not been long enough." Spike's woeful face aged one reflection at a time across the panorama of ticking clock faces that flanked his reclining figure. Funny. My life as a whelp, frolicking side by side with close friends in the living green Equestria, was a scant 9 years, and I spent the better part of 3 centuries constructing a desperate appendix to what's ultimately been a very trite chapter of my exhausting life. But it's the only chapter that holds any merit, that still makes my heart leap to remember the sound of Twilight's voice when she would call for quill and ink from across the library, when she patted me on the back for an assistant's job well done, when she tucked me in at night as I gave into nubile draconian slumber, dreaming of the magical morning to follow. Spike sighed thoughtfully, green fumes kicking into the air and brushing past a rotating display of brass planetoids. He turned to smile archaically in the last pony's direction. I think that the real reason why I locked myself inside the sarcophagus of the eastern mountains was to do my experiments. I refused to stare at the gray sky until I could somehow bring myself to see the sun once more. It's been over 300 years, and yet I still hear her voice. The dream of the golden dawn. Scootaloo gulped. Spike? She trotted over limpingly up towards his towering figure and gazed forlornly into his eye slits. Do you know how old I am? He squinted at her, rearing his green-crested neck back in thought. If my memory serves me right, you had to have been 8 years old at the time of the cataclysm, and at your chronological level, it has been 25.5 equestrian revolutions since the end of pony civilization. So that makes you 33. Scootaloo exhaled. She blinked as the words left her in a misty sigh. I'm 33 years of age. Her voice wilted as she avoided the gaze of the clock faces. She stumbled like a blind ghost towards the dead roots sticking out of the rooftops along the opposite side of the cavern. I remember when I was a little foal, and Apple Bloom's teacher, Miss Cheerily, told us how old she was. 33. And I thought to myself how strange it must be to be over 3 times as old as I was, to be over 3 decades old, to be an adult. She paused to glance at the many chips and dents in her hooves. And here I am, and those years have vanished in a great blink. She gulped, blushed, and gazed apologetically at the purple dragon looming behind her. I'm sorry, Spike. I know that can't possibly compare to 300 years. You would be surprised, child. He nodded at her. Centuries all blink the same. And in all those centuries, in all of that time, Scootaloo murmured, avoiding his face like she knew she was avoiding his coming response, you never saw another pony? Never found another soul besides myself? Slowly, the elder dragon shook his head. His voice came out like a funeral dirge. When I wasn't time traveling or experimenting, Scootaloo, I was searching. Searching for Celestia. Searching for Luna. Searching for Twilight. In all of my excursions, in all of my cold and lonely flights across this barren world, the only essence of ponydom I ever found was dead essence, until I found you. The fact that you're alive is as much a joy as it is a puzzle, for what shattered the world wasn't a cataclysm of physical means, but of magical means. The ponies, Earthen, Unicorn, and Pegasus, were all turned to dust by the sheer annihilation of their essence. I am so sorry, Scootaloo, but you shall be the last friend I will have the grace to speak with again. The day that you die will be the true end of ponies. The last pony shuddered. She clenched her scarlet eyes shut and bowed towards the ground, as if all the years that had leached the brightness from her body had suddenly crumbled all over her at once. She fought the tears, but the sudden and gentle stroke of Spike's hand against her shaved mane told her there was no point in the struggle. She sobbed quietly, shortly, under his soothing shadow, until she finally rediscovered the strength to speak. Somehow I knew it. All these years, alone with my fears and my hopes, I knew the truth. This lifeless world told it to me, with heartless gray eyes that flurried on forever. Right now, can't even begin to think of what it was that was keeping me going, that kept me living. I think in a lot of ways I wanted a moment like this to come, a reunion with any pony, with anybody, even if it was a dead friend. And as happy as I should be to see you alive and well, Spike, I can't be. I want this reunion to matter. It's something that I've always dreamed of in the scant moments in my life when I've actually been able to friggin' dream. Yet I can't hardly feel a thing. It's all so much, Spike. What this wasteland has taken from us, it's so much that I can't hardly feel anymore. I hate it. I hate it so dang much. I do too, child, he murmured towards her. The violet pendant dangled from his neck as he lowered his snout to gaze her lovingly in the eyes. If there's one philosophy that I've held strong to, that has kept me working so hard all of those time dumps in pursuit of the same impossible goal, it's that it is not always important to feel. Sometimes you only have to be. She inhaled sharply, gazing at him with brimming tears. That's just it, Spike. That's my dilemma. I'm the last pony. All I'll ever do is be, and someday that too will come to an end. He squinted his eye slits at her, bearing a brave and knowing smirk. You are more than just the last pony. If I assume correctly, you are a scavenger, a hunter, and ultimately a preserver. As you have traveled the skies from east to west, I have traveled the last 2.5 decades from future to past. And I too have learned a thing or two about preserving. There is something quaint and amusing about time. If you know how to play with the streams just right, you can make a moment last forever. Suddenly, having no choice but to be can provide an eternal practice, even for you, Scootaloo. That uttered, the dragon gestured his clawed hand towards the far side of the lab. Scootaloo's scarlet eyes dried in time to gaze clearly across the cave. Hobbling over, she stood gazing in wonderment at a series of bright shapes resting beautifully in an array of glass jars. Flowers, the filly murmured disbelievingly as she raised a hoof to gently brush the petals of the yellow and gold things blooming before her. They were soft to the touch, just like the wings of the butterfly that had danced before her during the phantom sojourn in Miss Cheerilee's courtyard. But how did you find these? They should be dead. All things should be dead, Spike said, sauntering over onto a pile of rattling gemstones beside her. He perched majestically and folded his wings about his purple self as he said, but all things that have ever been, even the dead things, are alive forever in memories. That's what's so wonderful about the past. All things considered, history is nothing more than a pile of eternal memories. To visit the past along the streams of reverse time is simply a way to relive memories from the inside out, instead of from the outside looking in. But you can't go back into the past, Spike, Scootaloo murmured aloud as she gently cradled a jar of daisies in her hose. At least, you can't go past the cataclysm. You just told me that. Her voice trailed off in mid-speech. A pair of wide scarlet eyes blinked at her from the sheen in the glass. She spun around and nearly dropped the flowers as she gazed at Spike with a sudden breathlessness. But you can send me? How, Spike? Her gaze darted nervously towards the burned diagram on the cavern wall. The swirling infinity symbol brushed up against the cataclysm as it brushed up against her soul. How was I able to go visit Miss Cheerilee when you couldn't? How is a pony capable of living so long in the absence of the sun and the moon? Spike Socratically returned. Why would a dark and dismal world, forever angry at the legacy of ponydom, fail in every aspect to slay its last living target? He smiled gently. It's all for the same reason that I have been enamored with equines since the day I was hatched. It's your spirit. Spirit? Scootaloo droned, gazing defeatedly at the flowers as they rattled in their cold shadow. Do I really have spirit, Spike? He reached over and planted a hand on her shoulder, smiling. I'll show you. It used to be the Ponyville skating rink, a large warehouse of a building where weekend ponies would spend laughable hours rotating the elliptical arena on wheeled hooves in each of other's merry company. Beyond the cataclysm, under the careful alterations of a purple draconian steward, the place had transformed into something else entirely, something beautiful. Scootaloo stood in a gaping stupor, her eyes reflecting a veritable labyrinth of hanging plants, flower beds, blooming vines, fragrant wreaths, and bowing fruit trees. The luscious vegetation grew joyfully in a naturalistic splash of life across the retrofitted interior of the warehouse. In place of infinitely looping skating platform, there was now gigantic basin of granite that housed soil, moisture, and enough room for several hundred species of flora to flourish. The fragrant, dew-laden Eden shimmered with green and pastel colors, all the while shimmering beneath one single light source, a gigantic mirror that hung on suspended chains along the ceiling. The vertically hung sheet of glass was framed with gold and crested all along its circumference with ornamented bands of solar swirls. To her heart-stuttering amazement, the last pony instantly recognized the looking-glass from an illustration she had seen in a book scavenged from the royal Canterlot Palace. It was none other than Princess Celestia's chamber mirror, Spike murmured as he strolled mightily past Scootaloo and raised his upper body to once more reignite the mana torches flanking the dangling artifact. For countless millennia, it served as the sole means by which a retiring goddess could regard her blinding visage. After so many ages of basking in the aura of the bringer of the sun, it's only natural that some of her glory still resides in it, and, when properly stimulated, it still resonates with her majestic glow, like an immaculate seashell having captured the heart of an ocean. The dragon lowered and took a deep breath, gazing proudly as his indoor preserve basked in the single golden rays emanating from the spotless mirror. It took several breathless moments, on multiple occasions between my time jumps, to capture bits of the dying world on the day after the cataclysm, but everything I managed to salvage I brought here, and the mirror in turn. It took the combined effort of over 10 of my past selves to construct this terrarium, piece by piece, but I do believe the labor was worth it. So long as I am alive, I shall look after this living monument to the past. It is the least I can do. And I'm sure you can relate, Scootaloo, when I say the least we can do for the wastelands is ironically the most we can do. It's amazing, Spike, she murmured breathlessly. Her brown coat and scarlet eyes stood out like a pale shadow against the screaming colors suddenly engulfing her as she trotted across the green ground and red mulch. Half of these things I've already forgotten about. She squinted as a bizarre insect surged past her, filling the air with a raspy buzz. She squinted long and hard in confusion until she witnessed the thing nestle itself within a crimson bud of a rose. Bees! She half giggled in a queer breath. I've forgotten about bees. Don't agitate them, child, or else you'll learn they haven't forgotten you. The Spike suddenly darted his snout every which way, looking desperately for something. Oh, blast! Did I forget to bring a mana prism? Where is my mind these days? Suddenly the elder dragon lurched. In a retching motion, he belched forth a plume of green smoke, and out from the flames there dropped a glass container mystically in his palm. Huh. Heh. Well, that was awfully thoughtful of myself. Scootaloo blinked. I brought you here, old friend, to test something. He strolled over towards her with the tiny jar in his scaled hand. Though I suppose one could say that the sudden trip I sent you on at Sugar Cube Corner was a necessary test in and of itself. But now I desire to perform an experiment that will hopefully illuminate our situation to a desired degree of clarity, and... He blinked suddenly at his lone pony companion. Scootaloo, do you see something of interest? As a matter of fact, I friggin' do. The wasteland wanderer stumbled up to something that stood out against the pristine oasis. In the center of the transformed skating rink there rested a meter-high hourglass positioned atop the silver platform. Inside the top and bottom glass cases of the thing a bizarre phenomenon was transpiring. At one moment there was a brilliant plume of violet-blue flowers in the bottom of the glass. Then, in a blink, the flowers withered and faded to ash, while an identical pile of ashes in the top of the glass coalesced oppositely into another bouquet of violet flowers. Another beat, and the top bouquet withered into dead matter as the ashes in the bottom half of the hourglass grew back and fast forward. This revolution would proceed infinitely, with the opposite jars of the hourglass possessing interchangeably dying and growing flowers in a timely crafted cycle. Do you like them? Spike was suddenly standing above and behind her on his haunches. She jumped slightly, locking a trembling gaze on the hourglass cycle. I'd pay 100,000 bars of silver to understand it before I even contemplated freaking out. He smiled. I melted the glass out of green flame, the two halves at alternating frequencies. The result is that both are balanced in flux of time and reverse time, acting off each other like opposite swings of a pendulum. The dragon pointed astutely with a glistening claw. The flowers in each jar are experiencing quantum shifts, forward and reverse, kept in flux by the equal energy of its sibling. I could never have possibly conceived of manufacturing this thing when I first set upon my experimentations. But by the 9th occasion that I rode reverse time back to the cataclysm, I felt it was appropriate to artistically express just how far I had come along in my research. I frankly never expected to show it to anyone. A warm smile. But then you came along. And what? The garden wasn't artistic enough? She laughed nervously, her eyes still locked on the immortal back and forth of the flowers and ashes before her. A soft breath escaped her. They're beautiful, Spike. She bit her lip ashamedly. What are they? The flowers, I mean. Lavenders, Spike said. Very fragrant, as sweet-smelling as they are for gazing at. Everything in this place is so gorgeous, Spike. Why frame lavenders? What's so special about them? Ho! The immense dragon's jaws curved in a gentle iron smile. They were the favorite of one delightful pony I knew. She was the most resplendent and elegant unicorn in all of Equestria, a filly who set this young whelp's heart aflutter long, long ago. His aged eye slits narrowed on the dying and sprouting twin bouquets as they cast a faded blue hue across his scales. Having them here, in limbo like this, means that I can appreciate them forever, as I will appreciate her forever. And, one day, when I am long gone, my ashes will dissolve, but these flowers will outlast me, and perhaps her memory will in turn.